You're 23 years old, but when you look in the mirror, you see someone who should be 30. You're 16, but you feel like you've already lived a lifetime. While your friends are carefree and lighthearted, you carry the weight of experiences that don't match your birth certificate. This isn't just in your head. It's a psychological phenomenon that scientists are only beginning to understand, and what they're discovering might change everything you thought you knew about age, identity, and the invisible burdens we carry. Welcome to the paradox of subjective age, where the number on your driver's license tells one story, but your mind and body tell another. And for millions of people, that story is one of premature aging, of feeling decades older than they should. The question isn't whether this is real. The question is why it happens and what it reveals about the hidden forces shaping our perception of time and self. Here's what most people don't know. While the majority of adults over 40 report feeling younger than their actual age, sometimes by as much as 20%, there's another group moving in the opposite direction. Teenagers and young adults who feel significantly older than they are. Research from North Carolina State University reveals a striking pattern. On days when young adults experience high levels of stress combined with low feelings of control, they report both feeling and looking older than their age. This isn't metaphorical. This is measurable, observable, and deeply consequential. Scientists call this your subjective age, the age you perceive yourself to be regardless of chronological reality. For most of human history, this concept seemed trivial, almost silly, but recent decades of research have revealed something extraordinary. Your subjective age is one of the most powerful predictors of your health, longevity, and psychological well-being. People who feel older than their chronological age face increased risks of depression, cardiovascular disease, cognitive decline, and even premature death. The stakes, it turns out, are incredibly high. So what causes this disconnect? What makes a young person feel like they're carrying decades they haven't lived? The answer begins with stress, but not the kind most people imagine. We're talking about chronic, unrelenting stress that rewires the adolescent brain in real time. Teenagers today report stress levels averaging 5.8 on a 10-point scale compared to 3.8 for adults. 70% of teens identify anxiety or depression as major issues among their peers. 75% of high school students report feeling stressed by schoolwork alone. This isn't normal developmental stress. This is a generation experiencing historically unprecedented psychological pressure. But here's where it gets fascinating. Stress doesn't just make you feel bad. It fundamentally alters your perception of time and self. Research on the adolescent brain reveals that the stress response in teenagers lasts 45 to 60 minutes longer than in adults. Their hormonal systems haven't yet developed the regulatory mechanisms to shut down the cortisol flood efficiently. This means that for young people, stressful experiences leave deeper impressions, create more lasting physiological changes, and accumulate in ways that fundamentally reshape their sense of who they are. When you experience trauma, adversity, or chronic pressure during adolescence, your brain doesn't just record the experience. It integrates that experience into your identity. Psychologists studying subjective aging have identified specific life events that dramatically accelerate the process. The death of a parent during childhood makes children feel significantly older than their peers. Losing a child makes middle-aged adults feel an average of 5 years older. Witnessing violence, living in unsafe neighborhoods, experiencing financial instability, all of these create what researchers call off-time events, experiences that force people to confront adult realities before they're developmentally ready. And here's the critical insight. These experiences don't just make you feel older emotionally, they make you feel older in your bones. Teenagers who grow up faster due to hardship report not just psychological aging, but physical aging. They describe their bodies as feeling heavier, more worn down, less resilient. It's as if the stress has aged them on a cellular level, and in many ways it has. The science backs this up in startling ways. Studies examining the biological markers of stress have found that people experiencing chronic adversity show accelerated cellular aging. Their telomeres, the protective caps on chromosomes that shorten with age, are measurably shorter. Their inflammatory markers are elevated. Their cardiovascular systems show wear patterns typically seen in people decades older. The body keeps the score, and that score is written in the language of premature aging. But there's another dimension to this phenomenon that's equally important: role transitions and identity formation. During adolescence, your brain is asking the fundamental question, if I'm not my parent, who am I? For some teenagers, circumstances force a premature answer. They become caregivers for younger siblings, take on adult financial responsibilities, navigate complex family dynamics that require emotional maturity beyond their years. These role transitions don't just add stress, they fundamentally alter self-perception. Research from multiple universities has found that teenagers who take on adult responsibilities, whether through necessity or circumstance, develop older subjective ages that persist into adulthood. They skip the identity exploration phase that psychologist Eric Erikson identified as critical for healthy development. Instead of gradually growing into an adult identity, they're forced into one prematurely. And while they may function effectively in these roles, the psychological cost is significant. There's also a cultural component that amplifies this effect. In Western societies that worship youth, feeling older than your age creates a unique form of alienation. Young people who feel older often describe feeling disconnected from their peers, unable to relate to the carefree attitudes and trivial concerns that dominate adolescent social life. They're old souls in young bodies, and that mismatch creates profound loneliness. One study found that higher levels of loneliness are directly associated with older subjective age. The isolation feeds the perception of aging, which increases the isolation, creating a self-reinforcing cycle. When you feel like you don't belong to your age group, you age faster psychologically. And when you age faster psychologically, the gap between you and your peers widens further. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. Feeling older isn't always bad. Research from Stanford Graduate School of Business discovered something counterintuitive. When people feel older than their actual age, they demonstrate significantly higher levels of prosocial behavior. They're more likely to donate to charity, volunteer for community projects, help strangers, and engage in behaviors that benefit society. Feeling older activates a sense of responsibility, a feeling that society is on our shoulders, and that we're expected to make the world better for the next generation. This finding reveals something profound about the psychology of age perception. When you feel older, you feel more accountable. You take on the psychological mantle of adulthood, with all its burdens, but also its sense of purpose and meaning. For some people, especially those who've been forced to grow up fast, this early acquisition of responsibility becomes a source of identity and even pride. Yet the health consequences remain concerning. People who feel older than their chronological age show consistently worse outcomes across virtually every measure. They have higher rates of cardiovascular disease, as research has demonstrated over 9-year follow-up periods. They show accelerated cognitive decline, performing worse on memory and executive function tests years down the line. Brain imaging studies reveal they have smaller volumes in key brain regions associated with cognitive control and social processing. Most alarmingly, they're at significantly higher risk for depression and anxiety disorders. The mechanism appears to be bidirectional. Stress and adversity make you feel older. Feeling older reinforces negative self-perceptions about aging. Those negative perceptions lead to less engagement in healthy behaviors, less exercise, worse sleep, social withdrawal. The reduced physical and social activity accelerates actual biological aging. It's a downward spiral where perception becomes reality. Sleep emerges as a critical factor in this equation. Recent research from the University of Exeter found that poor sleep quality directly predicts older subjective age. People who sleep poorly not only feel older, they view the aging process itself more negatively. This creates another vicious cycle. Stress disrupts sleep. Poor sleep makes you feel older. Feeling older increases stress and disrupts sleep further. For young people already experiencing high stress levels, this can be devastating. So what can be done? The research suggests several intervention points. First, increasing perceived control makes an enormous difference. Studies show that on days when young adults feel they have control over their lives, the aging effect of stress disappears entirely. The stress is still present, but it doesn't translate into feeling older. This suggests that empowerment, Giving young people agency and decision-making authority in their own lives could be a powerful protective factor. Second, maintaining social connections appears crucial. Lower levels of loneliness are consistently associated with younger subjective age across all studies. For young people who feel older, finding community with others who share their experiences, whether through support groups, therapy, or intentional friend groups, can help mitigate the isolation that accelerates subjective aging. Third, reframing the experience matters. Some people who feel older have learned to see it as a source of wisdom and capability rather than loss. They recognize that their early challenges forced them to develop resilience, emotional intelligence, and practical skills that give them advantages. This doesn't erase the pain of lost youth, but it provides meaning and reduces the negative health impact. Finally, addressing the root causes of chronic stress in adolescence, from school pressure to family instability to societal issues, represents the most fundamental intervention. As long as teenagers are experiencing historically unprecedented stress levels, we'll continue seeing this pattern of accelerated subjective aging with all its associated health risks. What makes this issue particularly urgent is that it's getting worse. Teen stress levels are rising year over year. More young people than ever report feeling overwhelmed, anxious about the future, and burdened by adult concerns. 75% of teens report stress about gun violence and school shootings. They worry about climate change, political instability, and economic uncertainty in ways previous generations didn't at their age. These macro-level stressors are creating micro-level psychological effects, aging an entire generation before their time. The paradox of subjective age reveals something fundamental about human psychology. We are not simply the number of years we've lived. We are the accumulated weight of our experiences, the residue of stress and adversity, the internalized sense of responsibility we carry. For those who feel older than their years, that weight is real, measurable, and consequential. It's written in stress hormones and brain structures, in cardiovascular health and sleep patterns, in the gap between who they are and who they feel themselves to be. But recognition is the first step toward change. Understanding that feeling older isn't a personal failure, but a natural response to challenging circumstances can reduce self-blame. Knowing that subjective age isn't fixed, that it can shift with changes in stress levels, social support, and sense of control offers hope. And acknowledging that many young people today are carrying burdens they shouldn't have to carry alone creates space for collective solutions. The story of subjective age is ultimately a story about resilience and vulnerability, about the remarkable plasticity of human perception and the stubborn persistence of psychological wounds, about how the body keeps the score and the mind tries to make sense of it all. For those who feel older than they are, the journey isn't about reclaiming lost youth. It's about finding ways to carry the weight more lightly, to transform the burden into wisdom, and to remember that the number on your driver's license doesn't define who you are or who you can become. Your age is both more and less than you think. It's a number, yes, but it's also a feeling, an identity, a lens through which you interpret your entire existence. And for those who feel older than their years, that lens has been ground by experiences that force them to see the world differently, earlier, and with a clarity that comes at a cost. The challenge now is learning to live with that clarity without letting it consume you, to honor the wisdom while grieving the innocence, and to remember that perception, however powerful, is not destiny. The question isn't just why you feel older than your age. It's what you're going to do with that feeling, how you're going to transform premature aging into purpose, burden into strength, and the weight of early responsibility into the foundation of a life that matters. Because ultimately, your subjective age isn't just about how old you feel. It's about how fully you're living, how deeply you're connecting, and how much control you're claiming over the narrative of your own life. And that story, regardless of the number on your birthday card, is still being written.